Okay, we want to do two things this morning. First, we want to talk about the annual TIF Revenue Report and all the data in that. And secondly, we want to announce this new, what we call tool for transparency, the TIF Viewer. We'll do a short demonstration, and then we'll take questions and comments. So the first point, looking at the TIF report, first looking countywide. So this includes Chicago and all the suburbs within Cook County. $683 million in TIF revenue for the 2013 tax year that we're collecting as we speak. Okay. Countywide, 435 active TIFs, roughly the same numbers last year. There's been some terminations and some new ones that pretty much cancels each other out. About 200 of those 435 TIFs saw revenue decline for an overall dip in, at least countywide, in the total revenue, a dip of 5.57% countywide. Now, while TIF declined, nearly $700 million has been collected countywide. And that's the same time as the taxpayers, unfortunately, don't have as much access to data and detailed accounting of these TIFs. Now, I want to turn specifically first to Chicago, then to the suburbs. The total amount for Chicago collected since 1986 is nearly $6 billion. I'll repeat that one. Just Chicago alone, since TIFs were created, what's been collected since 1986 is $6 billion. This year, Chicago alone will collect $422 million with its 151 TIFs. That is $35 million less than the previous year, or a 7.65% decline. The main reason for the TIF revenue being down is because some TIFs were terminated. 3 specifically in Chicago were canceled, including the near west side. Just some little tidbits about the kind of diversity of the TIFs. For example, the 3 biggest right now in Chicago is the near south, which is bringing in $65 million this year. Canal Congress, right over here, is bringing in $20 million this year. And a little further west, the Chicago Kinsey Conservation TIF is bringing in $19 million. Those are among the biggest in Chicago. There's also 21 of these TIFs in Chicago where they're bringing in no revenue, and those are mostly in poorer neighborhoods on the west and southwest sides. Among the most smaller TIFs in the city include 79th and Vincennes, bringing in $36,000 as opposed to the $65 million from near south. 45th and Western, bringing in $56,000, and the Armitage-Pulaski TIF bringing in $3,000. So you see there's a great diversity in how those TIFs are doing and how much money they're actually collecting. And so I said there's technically no new TIFs in Chicago. There's one thing we wanted to draw your attention to. The dramatic expansion of a singular TIF in Chicago, and that is the 105th and Vincennes TIF, and that is in your report. What's fascinating about that is it grew from 192 parcels. It's grown to 4,575. So from 192 parcels to 4,575. But unlike the DePaul Arena TIF, this TIF has not gotten much attention. My office looked into this just a little bit. We found inconsistent, incomplete information on the city's website about what this is all proposed for. I'm not commenting on the worthiness of this TIF, just that it's very hard to find the information necessary to make a good judgment about what's the purpose of this enormous expansion. Clearly, there still is a lot of work to be done to make it easier to follow the TIF money trail. Now jumping to suburban statistics briefly, the TIF revenue in just the Cook County suburbs outside of Chicago is $261 million, down 2% from last year, and that is for the 284 TIFs in suburban Cook. About 70% of all the municipalities in suburban Cook do have at least one TIF. Melrose Park has the most at 8, and Harvey and Evanston both have 7. There were roughly 9 TIFs terminated in the suburbs and 12 new ones created. So there's lots of information. I think this release is chock full of data that hopefully you can go through and find useful. Now I want to shift to the second point, because just weeks after announcing the new tax information, the new TIF information on the tax bill, okay, the only one thing I want to say to that is remember you're only going to see that information if you're in a TIF. Okay, that may be some confusion to people. So on the tax bill that people now got, okay, if you're in a tax bill, I mean, if you're in a TIF, I'm sorry, if you're in a TIF, that on your tax bill it would show how much money from your taxes went to the TIF. And that therefore you can see how much didn't go to the other taxing bodies. But you will not see that information if you're not, of course, in a TIF. And our guesstimate, I think, is about maybe 12 or 13% now of suburban residents are in a TIF, whereas it's more like 20% in the city of Chicago. So I want to move, though, to the next big TIF tool, and that is the TIF Viewer. It's an interactive mapping tool that lets you zero in on any TIF and view revenue information. It's a pretty fascinating thing, as you'll see. And we work carefully with the Bureau of Technology to create this TIF tool. So again, my thanks to President Preckwinkle and particularly the Bureau of Technology staff for all their work. What I want to do now is a brief demonstration, and then we'll take your questions. Bill Vaselopulos, our Director of Taxes and the guru of TIFs, and Tanya Anthofer, who is head of our mapping department, will do a short demonstration of the new TIF tool. And then we'll go to questions. Okay, Bill?
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. We'll wait for Tanya to get set up, and she is. Okay. This TIF Viewer.
It's okay, or does it matter?
Pardon me? Lights? Should we? Okay. This TIF Viewer was designed by us with the cooperation of the Cook County Bureau of Technology, their GIS department. It has a number of nice tools that can be accessed from your own computer or your mobile device at wherever you're at. So first, when you open the TIF Viewer, it shows just the basic map of Cook County, and all of the current TIFs are highlighted there. If you're interested in a particular municipality, you can simply choose the municipality with the drop down there on the left-hand side. Once you select the municipality that you're interested in, it'll highlight, it'll go to that municipality and show all the TIFs within that municipality. The viewer can also zoom in and show you the tabular information of each one of those TIFs of those municipalities is found at the bottom. And that tabular information shows you the first year of the TIF, the grand total of what they've received over the life of the TIF. I shouldn't say what they received, I should say what was taxed and what, if there was total 100% collection, what they would have received. And a year-by-year breakdown of that amount since the inception of the TIF. If you go to a specific TIF and click on it directly, you're going to get a pop-up of that same information, showing year by year, you know, the inception of the first year of the TIF, and year by year all the money that the TIF has been receiving if there's 100% collection. You can also use, you know, general standard tools to zoom around throughout just these TIFs, but throughout the entire county. Zooming in, panning back, going from left to right. When you zoom in, you can get parcel information. As you can see, PIN numbers are popping up there. And as you click on a particular PIN, you'll see the general characteristics of that PIN, including a picture of the property. For detailed information, there's also a link to the assessor's website. Okay? Also, instead of just having the streets, you can look at a different layer and look at aerial views. So, you know, many times when you're just looking at streets, you're not sure exactly what you're looking at, but with the aerial view, we'll show you the exact buildings involved. And with great specificity, you can pick up exactly where you are within the map and on that TIF. There are other things to view in the TIF. There are other ways to search in the TIF Viewer. If you have a permanent index number, you just type in the permanent index number, it'll zoom right to that PIN. And show you the same information. It's just a different way to search. We can also search by address. At the top, you'll find where you can enter your address. Now, whether the address is in a TIF or not, it will pop up. Even if the address is inaccurate, it's going to take you to that location that is nearby what you entered, and then you could see all the surrounding properties if that particular address isn't exactly what you're looking for. But of course, if it is a precise address and accurate, it's going to go right to that address. Finally, in the city of Chicago only, we have the ward map layer. So you can enter in a ward, and it will go to that ward and display all the TIFs within that ward. And again, you have access to the same information. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. All the TIFs for that ward are highlighted, and when you click on them, you'll get the information. That's just a brief overview. There are other helpful links that we've connected to this tool. At the top, our website there's a link to our website. There's a link to the Cook County GIS department. And we also have a link to our, and I'll brag a little bit, our award-winning TIF video, Understanding TIF Videos. That's a video that we created last year, and we showed you actually last year at this time that video. We've gotten a lot of great response from that video, a lot of comments like, well, now I understand, things like that, and we recently received an award on it. So that concludes our brief review of what we're rolling out.
What's the address?
You can get to it from our website.
You can get to it from our website, cookcountyclerk.com.
Okay, questions?
So in terms of the information, you got the revenues by year. Is there any link to the city's portion, or do you have some sort of explanation what each TIF is supposed to be for, the plans that go with it, and that stuff that would be left to the city side?
We do for every municipality.
You have to come up here.
Outside.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We do have a link to each of the municipalities' websites, okay, and it'll show you. Now, the specific information of that TIF, we don't have access to. It's one of, the transparency issues that we've always been striving for. But it'll go to the city's TIF website, and then from there you can get more specificity. Yeah.
Does the Bureau contain employment certification records?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
The Bureau contain employment certification records?
No, it does not. No, it does not. It is based on the information we have, okay, in terms of mapping, in terms of the tax information, the tax amounts that TIFs receive. But the details, TIF for TIF, that's information that is maintained by the municipalities.
You guys like focusing on TIFs a lot. Do you have some sort of deep-seated conviction as to the merits of TIFs, or whether they're good or bad, or?
Well, first, so you understand, we have a fiduciary responsibility at the office to do this, since we're responsible as the county clerk's office to prepare all the information that we declare the tax rates for roughly 1,500 taxing bodies, from big ones like Chicago to the Dixmoor Park District. So that's where we have a technical responsibility to give out this information. As to the larger question, I believe TIFs are a valuable economic tool if used properly. They're a way to, ideally, the purpose of them was to try and take areas that are relatively impoverished, where you can get no private capital, and therefore by bringing in some revenue, what we call TIF revenue, that money could be wisely invested to bring back a neighborhood or an area, then increasing the value of the property, and everybody wins. So in theory, it's a very good thing. It's used better in some places than others. I have been critical of the lack of transparency and I guess in my own personal judgment, the way in which some of the money has been spent. I mentioned at the beginning, $6 billion since 1986. A very, very, very large portion of that is downtown. It's still very hard to find information about exactly how it is plans to be spent or how it's spent, particularly if you start asking the tougher questions when you spent, I don't even know, in the central TIF that's now gone. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you easily track of these hundreds of millions of dollars, how were the contracts let? Were they competitive? Were they not? So again, it's a tool that can be used wisely. We point, for example, to Lansing, Illinois. Lansing, Illinois has a TIF report that their citizens should be very proud of. It provides more information, I believe, than's even required by law. And that's the kind of model we'd like to see. So it's a tool that can be used. It has been misused, I think, unfortunately, in the city at times. And then beyond that, it's more of a judgment, okay? A tool devised to help impoverished neighborhoods, what we call blighted neighborhoods. The vast majority of the money spent in the downtown Chicago area. That's not an inherent contradiction in the way they define it, but it raises serious questions, given the suffering in parts of our city and the lack of a tax base in some of the taxing bodies. So remember that $6 billion didn't go to the other taxing bodies, which means that's about $3 billion that didn't go to the schools alone.
Which ward map did you use?
I'm sorry?
Which ward map did you use for Chicago? The old one or the one that's supposed to go into
Oh,
effect
good
as
question. It was the,
municipal, and then
which
next
one?
year's the municipal election?
Was it the old one?
The existing one right now.
I'm sorry, the new one?
Yeah.
Okay, which now, and that recent court decision means that that's proper. Okay, and it's very difficult for the residents, but so the one that the alderman recently put into practice, even though they're not elected from that district, that's the one we used. Okay.
You talk about TIFs being a tool to help blighted neighborhoods. Yet earlier, you were mentioning that some of the TIF districts and some of the more blighted neighborhoods really hadn't collected much revenue to help those neighborhoods. What accounts for that?
Well, we have to remember, the way TIFs work, right, you start with the assumption that you take a certain geographical area, and then you start collecting money, in other words, so that the pins in that property, okay, the property is frozen. So in many of the poor areas, there is no increase in valuation. In fact, there's a decline. Okay, so part of it is just the reality of economic lack of well-being. To counteract that, of course, and I'm sure that everybody wants to counteract it, including the mayor, is that how do you take an area? Like we've seen the results of downtown, okay? We see enormous effects of the TIFs, even on the Millennium Park that the Tribune has written about recently. But if you're dealing with an area that is really blighted, particularly if it's large scale, it takes a lot of resources. See, in my own case, when I was alderman up in the 49th Ward, and we had a very depressed area in, let's say, the Howard, Clark, Paulina area, there a TIF, it's a small enough area that we could make a difference. And today, for example, there's a new shopping center, there's stores, there's a great place to exercise. So it's worked the way it should. But you take other areas of the city which are devastatingly poor and big, the only way you're going to deal with that is you're not going to get much TIF revenue from the existing taxing bodies. You have to pour much more in there. And without going too much, historically, what mayors and others do is they build public facilities to try and help in impoverished areas, the police stations, and the fire stations, and the libraries, or they rebuild schools. So the point, that's why there's not much money. The bigger question, though, is where is the commitment, and what kind of commitment it takes to make a difference there. So,
Does that undercut the argument for TIFs in those more blighted areas?
not necessarily, because again, if they were, in other words, again, it's a tool. It's a way to raise money. The problem, particularly in Chicago, it's been a way to create a $6 billion fund that most people don't understand. Okay? In the suburbs, it's a little different because they tend to be smaller. You tend to see it. You know, Evanston, for example, they used a TIF. I can't remember all the details, but a TIF to build that new big shopping mall and theater in Evanston. That kind of worked very successfully. They're using it to build some low and moderate income housing. It's easier there, and I do think there's more accounting for the information. But like I say, with so much money in Chicago and kind of our history of, you know, the aldermen have to prove these things, but what alderman is going to say no? And while many of the aldermen don't like the fact that so much of the money is going to the downtown area, do they want to complain, and then what's going to happen to their TIF? So it's a tool that could be used more successfully than it is. You know, and we'll have more on this in 2 or 3 months. We're doing a lot of investigation on maybe ways to make more information available. We have an outstanding intern from Chicago Harris School, graduate school, is working on this. So there'll be more to tell you. For example, if you want to look at things, look at the state comptroller's report, because everybody has to legally give that information. If you look at the state comptroller's report, you'll see incredible differences and vagueness and lack of information, or we spent $100,000, but for what? 500,000, but for what? So that's always the goal. And then if we have the information, it's easier to debate whether or not we should do the DePaul Arena, that we should spend as much money as we did in State Street and Michigan Avenue, okay? Those fundamental judgments are hard to make when the public doesn't understand where the money's going. Yes? Go ahead.
I just wanted you to explain a little more about the reason for the rollout of this website. Were you getting a lot of information requests from residents about TIFs and their awards, and were there like specific ones that people had questions about?
Well, I'd like to think it was that. It's really, we do get requests, but it's really not that. I wish we got more. I think it's just that, remember, technology is advancing, okay? There's things that we want to do. Bill and his department want to do these things, but as we get more sophisticated, and again, the Bureau of Technology with the county, there's just a lot of things we can do today in taxes and elections that we couldn't do before. So part of this is, like Bill mentioned, the little video. People do not understand TIFs. We understand that. So all we can do, this can help the neophyte who says, I saw it, but I can do this much. Okay, here's the Rogers Park TIF Fund Devon. I'm going to look. And then more sophisticated groups that are on this, or candidates, you know, running for office anywhere in the county. So it's mostly that the technology is there, and we know that we believe information is critical. So it's mostly because we can do it, and we've had people like Bill focused on this for years, trying to figure out how to do it.
What were you able to ascertain about 105th and Vincennes, the purpose of that expansion?
I don't know. Again, I'm not casting aspersions, just telling you a growth. You know, I think there was some stuff in one of the reports way back. There were some housing, if I don't remember exactly, maybe 223 units, of which 40-some would be affordable. And street work, there was a lot of talk about improving Halsted, but still pretty vague. But see, the point is that could end up being, hey, that's kind of exciting. You know, it's a big area, it needs a lot of work. But I think we'd all feel better, because I think most people would agree now that these should not be funds, particularly billions of dollars, that are used at the whim of a particular mayor. And I do believe there is a legitimate critique over the last 20-some years of how it's been used. Okay? If anybody wants to find out any more about the TIF Viewer or practice anything, otherwise we thank you, and we will have more information about suggestions to perhaps better ways to provide more information. My guess is in 2 or 3 months. Try and do it before the hot next year's elections. So, thank you.